Okay, voters, welcome. Once again, this is Simone Boutet. I am interviewing the candidates running for the 7th Congressional District, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Reed Showalter. Reed, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about who you are and why you chose to run for office?
My name is Reed Showalter. I am running for Illinois 7th Congressional. I was born and raised here in this district, born and raised in Oak Park, actually. I've spent the last several years of my life in federal public service trying to take on giant corporate power where it makes people's lives unaffordable and inaccessible. And I'm running because we are facing crisis after crisis, overlapping crises that in many cases have been there for decades and have been left unaddressed, and in other cases have become very acute right now. We need somebody from this district who can do two things at the national level as our representative. We need somebody who is going to meet those moments with the big swing progressivism that a district like this deserves. This is the youngest and bluest district in all of Illinois, and it is the center of progressive energy in the Midwest, and it deserves a representative who is going to carry that fight forward. And also, in a world where we are facing these tremendous crises and the rise of violent authoritarianism and a climate crisis that has been brewing up my entire life and an affordability crisis that has worsened the already intense pinch that people and families have been feeling here in this district and across the country for many years now. We need somebody who can step in on day one and pull the emergency brake on the horrifying things that are happening. I have spent the last many years of my life in versions of federal government in basically every portion of federal government that one can be in, learning how this type of federal public service works. So I am able to be the person that pulls that emergency brake. I worked in Congress on the Judiciary Committee investigating the biggest companies in the world. I worked at the Federal Trade Commission as an attorney, at the Department of Justice as an attorney, as well as leading a lot of our legislative affairs work, the way that the department speaks and negotiates with Congress, and worked the final year of the Biden administration at the White House National Economic Council, overseeing 17 agencies and fighting for regular people to get a fair shot against giant corporate power. That kind of experience is frankly unmatched in the field, even in a field of tremendously qualified and successful existing public servants. And it is really, really important at a time like this, especially when whoever wins is going to win in the middle of the Donald Trump administration, that we have somebody who can initiate a congressional investigation, that knows their way around a subpoena to a cabinet secretary. And I'll say, like, it's a skill that I didn't want to be a thing that is a defining part of this election, but that is not an intimidating or new thing to me. That was my job.
Going back to what you said, you talked about big swing progressivism. I've never
Yeah.
heard that particular term. Can you define that?
I think sometimes people um, people think that progressivism has to be one of two things. It either has to be um, incrementalism, like little tweaks that get us closer to a big goal, or if you are taking big swings, people assume that it is impractical or impracticable. And I want to talk about a politics here that recognizes that not only can we take really big swings, but we must. The solution to the problems we're facing right now are no longer incremental. And so this, in my mind, means that the really great moments, the great steps forward that we took in the past, the sort of New Deal era swings, the Civil Rights era swings, the Reconstruction era swings that say we have a climate crisis and we should respond to that on the scale of a Green New Deal, that we have a healthcare affordability crisis and we should respond to that not just on the scale of Medicare for all, but systemic infrastructure level investments that build new hospitals and clinics, that train new nurses and doctors, that take on pharmaceutical giants, not just with subsidies, but by having the federal government step in and, in some cases, manufacture those drugs themselves in systemic ways that allow us to take on those costs. We have a housing crisis that people can't afford housing and we are short millions of units across the country. Rather than hoping that the private market runs to our aid with a series of tax incentives and regulatory nits and picks, I'd like to see real substantive affirmative action by the government to build housing, build it at cost, sell it at cost so that a young family can buy a house affordably without exclusively running into the arms of like a pure private developer driven market. And that kind of big swing is what allows us to meet a moment like this where everything is on fire.
You got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, that's right. When we have the opportunities even to make small reforms, if we haven't set out the big swings we're aiming at, it's very easy to have all of these paths cross, and we are working at cross purposes, and we are making reforms that maybe help in a short-term way, but dig us a deeper hole in a long-term way. I'll give you an example here. Healthcare is a recent example. I don't think that there is a way to solve the ballooning costs of the American healthcare system without joining the rest of the developed world in a single payer healthcare system. To date, a lot of the solutions was over this idea of we need to extend ACA subsidies to make sure that people's premiums don't skyrocket. That type of solution, it allows you to solve the very short-term pain, but it is, at the end of the day, an additional set of subsidies exclusively going to private insurance companies. And so if the only thing that we are pushing for here is just more of a subsidy structure to private insurance without expanding on-ramps to things that allow us to build towards Medicare for all, then we are not going to dig ourselves out of it. And maybe worse than that, we're spending more taxpayer dollars into the profit margins of the very companies who spend every year lobbying to make sure we never have single payer healthcare. I want to see things like a Medicare buy-in as our condition, not just subsidies. I want to see things like an option for a national pharmacy benefit manager or lowering the age of eligibility for Medicare. So even if we can't get the big thing, our incremental reforms are walking us closer to the goal that we have set out.
So you're talking about a lot of different priorities. What do you want to tackle first?
In the very acute sense, the first order of priority is pulling the ripcord and trying to stop the march of authoritarianism. It is trying to use every ounce of power with the powers of Congress that are not currently often deployed, like the power to enforce its own subpoenas without going to the courts. I also believe that the Democratic Party, if we do this right, is going to win back the Senate and the presidency as well. When we have the Congress and the presidency, the first order of business has to be democracy reform because it is the thing that has stymied all of the big swings that we have tried to take in the past. And unless we are able to do this sort of sweeping gerrymandering, money in politics, electoral, congressional reform alongside a court reform that does not put us at the whims of a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court that is dead set on tearing up any efforts to rebalance a country to actually deliver for regular people, then we are not able to take these big swings. And there's a lot underneath that. Obviously, I think we should more aggressively police money in politics. Obviously, that also bumps up against a Supreme Court that has presided over not just Citizens United, but FEC v. McCutcheon, and like a whole litany of cases that have said that money is speech and that there is an unfettered right to buy your congressional representative. But also, it is voting rights reform like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and it is anti-gerrymandering, and it is a court reform that says, look, this shouldn't be a partisan court packing regime where every party comes in every 4 years and says, we're going to add 4 of our justices to the Supreme Court. I would like to see a version of the Supreme Court that has something like 100 members pulled up from a nonpartisan independent nominating committee for the president to select from that rotate up in 7 or 9 member bodies for a series of cases and are done so in a way that does not highlight the priorities of a hyper-partisan Congress, Senate, and presidency in that appointment process. We can't get term limits. We cannot change the composition of the current members without a constitutional amendment. And even with a big blue wave, I don't see those types of numbers happening anytime soon. But those are the types of essential reforms that if we can't do that, then it's going to be really hard to take the types of big swings that we need to take to further improve both the affordability crisis, the climate crisis, and the wider crisis of, for example, ICE and militarized police forces rolling through our towns and kidnapping our neighbors and killing them. The parade of horrors there are created by this underlying rot to our democracy and enabled by a Supreme Court that has expanded money in politics, thrown the doors open for functionally unaccountable police actions with no right of action or accountability from private citizens, from the state, and even in many cases from the federal government itself. And that type of reform is the groundwork for the types of big swings that I think we need.
I have
Yeah.
another question, and I'm putting you on the spot here, but I
Yeah.
have a legal question that maybe you know. What is the way to get rid of these Cash Patels and
Yes.
Christy Noem and all that stuff?
The answer is Congress can and should impeach these people.
Mm,
And that impeachment process is one of the things that we should use to build a record and create accountability for the types of officers from Kristi Noem to RFK Jr. to down to Greg Bovino who are operating in the service and under the mantle of our power, the constitutional power that we have vested in them as officers of the United States, and they are unconstitutionally wielding that power, and that merits impeachment and removal from their position in office. Congress can not just hold these senior officials accountable, but also we can and should be passing the types of laws that allow people to sue when their constitutional rights and their right to life is violated by
mm.
by rogue officers of the states.
You are looking at a lot of work. What do you think is going to be the hardest of these problems to fix?
The reason why I put democracy reform first is also because I think it's the hardest one to do. There are two forces that we are fighting against with democracy reform, and both of them are really powerful. There is a 45, I guess 50-year conservative effort by the Republican Party towards um, small government conservatism or imperial conservatism at this point. And so these, the takeover of the Supreme Court and um, the sort of growth of the imperial power of the unitary executive, all of those are efforts by a long-term right-wing project to capture and build a government that is unanswerable to the people. And it worked alongside a big money, big corporate power efforts to buy influence. There are a number of very easy ways to buy into these two twin problems of our democracy crisis, which is we have a president who is a mad king who has amassed huge amounts of the discretion that we trusted presidents to use wisely, and that the Republican Party amassed and with complicity of the Democratic Party at times too, amassed to a presidency and a increasingly consolidated um, corporate and industrial complex in our country that is more than happy to cave to whatever that authoritarian impulse is, as long as it allows them to get a little bit more money and a little bit more profit specifically. And they will trade political favors and they will pay into it in whatever way possible because it allows them to continue to buy laws that favor them and lax enforcement. And whatever that is, all of that rots out our ability to have a democracy that works for people and that lets us pass the things that actually serve them. You do not get Donald Trump without concentrated economies, the Palantirs and Elon Musks and the billionaire robber barons of our economy. Those two things have to go hand in hand. And a politics in which a few billionaires can functionally buy elections, uh, and in which a few billionaires are very happy to cave and trade political favors and fire disfavored political commentators and change the ecosystem of our online public squares in order to service their political identities on behalf of a president. That is the recipe that creates fascism. It is the imperial presidency and its money in politics, and those two things are really hard to take on. I think there are huge systems that encourage this type of concentrated power. Like this system that we have right now is perfectly designed to deliver the outcomes we are getting from it. It is designed to enable corporate concentration. It is designed to enable the continued underpayment of working people and overpayment and wealth concentration at the very tippy top of that distribution. It's designed to allow companies to skirt regulatory power and trade favors, and it's designed to empower the types of authoritarian overreaches and violent abuses of power that we've seen from this government just because these are the laws we've passed. The president has tremendous amount of power given to him by Congress, and These corporate behemoths have tremendous leeway to gobble up their rivals because the laws that we have passed have been eroded by decades of precedent and in some cases by actions by our own government intentionally.
When we go back a little bit just towards politics and policy, if you think about, there are many times on the left that two values will conflict. And I'll give you an example from my local government experience, which is that if you enact green building regulations, it makes it more expensive to build affordable housing, right? So you
Yes.
have a tension between two values that you hold. How do you approach a decision like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are a number of places where I think conflicts seem like conflicts and are not. I think there are two animating values, though, for me when I am tie breaking, if that makes sense. I believe that power is to be wielded on behalf of those with less power, that there is never an excuse for those with power to dominate and abuse those without it. When there are conflicts, the solution in my mind is always to ask more from those that have more to give. I think there's a lot of ways that we are not necessarily trapped in just the trade-off of let's increase costs and let's protect a local wetland, for example. When I talk about the housing crisis from the federal level, I am talking about a federal deployment of resources that say we can accelerate the timeline for building because the federal government is the one that holds the federal the environmental reform authorities and say, all right, our federal building projects are going to jump to the front of the line, and our federal building projects are going to jump to the front of the line for access to capital and for construction rights. And that type of work will allow, for example, the non-for-profit function of the federal government to build in a way that um, makes affordable housing available. I think the solution there always has to be that solving the crisis comes first, and it takes something from all of us to make that work. It's going to take sacrifices from somewhere, and the sacrifices should come from the people who have plenty to give.
So, studies and surveys have shown that the American public has lost its trust in government.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a Trump phenomenon. It has gone back into the Biden era and before. And the statistics are low that 9% of Democrats trust the government and 35% of Republicans do. So,
Mm-hmm.
no matter, even if you're a Trumper, you still don't trust the
Yeah.
government. So how do you, does that bother you, and what would you do to fix it?
In a democracy, government is the people's power. Full stop. If we do not have a government that is manifesting that, then it means that we are not governing ourselves. Like something else is going to step in there, and the thing that is stepping in is instead the whims of a madman and corporate power. And I don't think that this type of system can deliver for long or even stand under its own weight unless it is trusted to actually deliver for people. That's how a democracy maintains its legitimacy. The whole point of this is consent of the governed, and you don't get consent of the governed if you don't have a government people believe will do things for them. I I've frankly given up hope that the Republican Party is going to mount a successful rebuilding of government that makes people want to believe in our democracy. And so I think the first step on this from the Democratic Party side is building a real opposition party, not one that's going to send sternly worded tweets in all caps and letters of disappointment, but things that are saying, here is our shadow Department of Justice, our shadow AG, our shadow Secretary of Commerce, like what is done, frankly, across the world, where you say, here are the things that we would be doing were we in power and building the plans for power when we take it back. The single greatest mistake in my mind of the last administration was the failure to prosecute Donald Trump for inciting a violent insurrection. It's very hard to believe that there are consequences in a system of law when you do not have consequences for the most powerful when they threaten the foundations of our system. I also think there's a lot that can be done to just like make people feel or at home and safe in their communities again. Like our law enforcement has been for a very long time roving with unchecked power. ICE is a perfect example of this. ICE and CBP, the fact that they are deployed in the way they are is unconscionable, but also they are under the current law. They are legally allowed to arrest people on suspicion of the wrong accent. or on suspicion of looking like they don't belong here. And that's a congressional failure. That's a legal failure. We needed to have a law preventing that for forever. Frankly, we need laws preventing there being weapons of war in the hands of these types of agents. They are civil law enforcers. And so you are creating the conditions of a tinderbox that make government less trustworthy and feel like oppressors because you're putting the tools of oppression and the conditions of oppression in their hands. This is why we need a government that takes big swings and really delivers for people. Because we are going to have a chance now to rebuild government, a once in a generation chance. It has been burned down in front of our eyes.
Mm,
USAID doesn't exist anymore. The
yeah,
CFPB has been hollowed out. Agencies that have survived have done so with losses of their most senior staff,
yeah.
cuts to the marrow of the programs that they're doing, and it's not enough to just say, okay, we're back in power and we're hiring back to how it was 3 years ago. One, you won't be able to replace the talent that was lost. You won't be
Yeah.
able to replace the impact that is lost. And two, rightly, people won't believe that those programs are safe from future disruption.
Mm.
And so the only way out of this, I think, is to rebuild something out of the ashes of that are bigger, better, more exciting, um, for a whole host of reasons. The only way you're going to get private sector people to come back into a government that has become volatile, untrustworthy, and difficult to work in is by giving a mission that is exciting enough that people say, you know what, okay, I'll take the swing. You know, not a HUD that is just doing the same subsidy work that it was previously, but a HUD that's building 4 million homes in the largest and most ambitious affordable housing development program in modern American history. That's a HUD that people join, and it's a HUD that people believe in from the outside as well. Same thing with the USDA or with HHS or with any of these parts of government. The big swings are the essential threshold step to getting people to work there again, believe in it again, and have a government that is worth putting our faith, our tax dollars, and our continued belief in.
I hear what you're saying. You want there to be an inspiration, right? A real
Yeah.
inspiration for people to work. So one of the questions I've been asking everybody is about political polarization, which a lot of
Hmm.
people find to be dysfunctional. But if you're talking about, big programs that are definitely left, what do you have to say about the polarization and how do you, as someone who wants big left things,
Yeah.
how are you going to make that better or worse, or what do you think?
I think the story of polarization on these types of like big structural changes to what government does is misunderstood. It is not necessarily a red-blue polarization. If you ask people whether they should be able to have access to healthcare
Mm,
without having to pay twice what every other country in the world pays, people nearly uniformly think that that's a good idea. There are a bunch of these types of things that voters, regular people, agree on. And a lot of the polarization is driven by the team sport infrastructure of Congress, the electoral process, and the media system that swirls around it. So some of this is just, hey, we've got a bunch of crises, and if we want a jobs program that builds us new housing, that makes healthcare affordable, that addresses the things that people have been calling for a long time, then we have to take those big swings. And they are actually like, it's weird, I've had conversations in recent years with like people in like deep red Louisiana or something. You get 20 minutes into those conversations and you actually ask them about their values, and you're like, brother, you're a communist. That's not like, you think that you're a drain the swamp MAGA Republican, but you want you want affordable housing, healthcare, and food, and you want um, a collective state to do it for you. But
yeah.
two, I think there are strategic options. You can do sizable reforms, even bit by bit, collaborating with Republicans on single issues. There are Republicans who call for reforms to pharmacy benefit managers. And so, like, there are little tweaks that you can do there, and making sure that those reforms aim in the right direction matters. And the third point on this is that we fight for our values. And my values are the same in no matter what room I am in. They stay the same no matter what the situation is. And we have watched the generational triumph of a Republican Party fighting consistently for a set of values that is small government, that is easier for business to operate unfettered, that is easier for a president to deploy military force. Those have been core and consistent values of a Republican Party ideological project for 45 years. And fighting for those values has reshaped fundamentally the world that we are living in today. And unless we have a Democratic Party that is openly and full-throatedly fighting for the values of progressivism as well, then we are not going to find ourselves in a world that reflects those values.
From a voting perspective, it's hard to believe that Republicans don't care about their constituents' health care. There are issues that you're talking about that are about people. They're not about
Right.
Republican people or Democrat people. They're about people. Minimum
Yeah.
wage. You have all these rural Americans that like you're saying they have to drive forever to get to a hospital, and lots of people can't afford housing all over the place. To me, it's always been puzzling.
Frankly, much of the right versus left has stayed in the realm of social issues, um, civil rights issues. And this is why I say there's like the two parts. I don't believe there's ever an instance where we should sacrifice the civil rights of our neighbors to placate a bipartisan itch. Like the fact that trans healthcare is just true, and I don't care whether Republicans oppose that. The fact that, my brother deserves the right to marry his husband is just true, and I will die on that hill. Uh,
Hmm.
but there are plenty of places in the economic realm, especially, where we can talk about reforms to the delivery of healthcare, where we can talk about taking on the corporate power that makes, you know, chicken production wildly concentrated and hurts farmers and also drives up costs in the grocery store. That really does drive us towards what I'm talking about, which is challenging corporate power, bringing down costs, and delivering for regular people. There are red lines that we cannot cross as progressive because they are just values that I hold to be like inexorably true. But there are plenty of places strategically to make reforms, especially on delivery programs or ways to challenge corporate power, that as long as we are aiming towards the North Star that progressivism is fighting for, then sign me up. I'm willing to work with people for it.
So when you get elected, what do you think is going to be the hardest personal challenge for you? Or even like I'll call it professional
Yeah,
challenge.
I am going in eyes wide open that the Congress is among the least functional of our branches of government. I'm interested in a progressivism that gets things done, and walking into an institution that struggles to get things done is hard. If doing this right, you are spending all of your time either in DC, like building coalitions, writing legislation, holding hearings, building accountability, doing the deep research and work that it takes to be effective on all of those tasks, or back home listening to every part of your district, trying to deliver constituent services, listening and talking to the people across the district who otherwise wouldn't come to you. And doing all of those things simultaneously is a wildly difficult and energy intensive process. When I win here, the thing that's going to be the most challenging is sleep. uh, and maintaining a semblance of humanity here. Nobody who comes in will have the seniority and pull and committee assignments that Representative Davis had. And so going in and finding ways to creatively drive back resources to the district and deliver for people is a really critical. Sitting on the Appropriations Committee for 29 years gives you a ton of sway. And it's why I talk about these big swing things as well, because I just can't walk into the Appropriations Committee in the same way and say, I need these grants prioritized for my district. But what I can do is push and build power for the types of large scale big swings that are the rising tides that lift all boats and that do actually drive resources back to the district in a way that might actually mirror the level that a 30-year member of House Appropriations can do.
In a crowded field, how do you want people to remember you?
I think we need at this historical moment and from this seat somebody who is both clear-eyed in their moral vision and energetic in their progressivism, but also with the experience to get it done. And I've done this work for years. And uniquely, I have the most recent, relevant, applicable federal experience to do the things that I'm talking about here. We need somebody who is going to walk in on day one and say, I already know the people in Congress. I have their chiefs of staff in my cell phone because we're friends, and I am going to be able to introduce the bills for Medicare for All and national housing programs and affordable food and utilities and reforms to our democracy, as well as perform the hearings and oversight and accountability that we desperately need if we're going to move on from this moment, because it's been my job, and it's been my job at the federal level.
Thank you very much for being with me today.
Likewise, I really appreciate it.